Hi, today we're going to be looking at the Softube Weiss Compressor limiter. So this is taken from the Weiss Compressor limiter hardware piece, and that costs about $10,000 to buy. It's been a mainstay in mastering studios for a long time because it's really precise in how you can control things. It sounds great. It's very transparent. So it's a great piece of hardware. And it's digital. It always has been digital. It's always been software, but running on hardware processors in a hardware box. And Softube have gotten together with Weiss, and they have ported the code perfectly intact from the hardware into a plugin. So it's 0 and 1 identical, exactly the same, meaning that it sounds identical to the hardware. So you've now got access to one of the more expensive and sought after pieces of mastering compression hardware there is in software form, which is fantastic. So they've split it up into different plugins. You can get, one of the plugins has everything in it. Then they've taken the de-esser part out and made a separate plugin, and the limiter part made a separate plugin. And this is the compressor limiter part. And so this is what we're going to be looking at today. Very useful in a mastering context. So I hope you find this useful, and let's have a look. So here we are. Now, I said in the intro that the Weiss is a great mastering compressor, and it is. It's renowned as a mastering compressor. But it's also equally good on single instruments, as we're going to see. And I think the reason that it hasn't got the reputation on single instruments is simply because of the price tag on the hardware. As I said, it's about $10,000, and that is prohibitively expensive for most recording and mixing studios. And so it ends up being in just a kind of in the realm of mastering studios mainly. But now that it's in software form, and we can actually try it in individual instruments, it turns out that it's just as good on single instruments as it is as a mastering compressor. So I'm going to demonstrate that. We're going to look at snare, and we're going to look at bass and drum bus and the master bus. So what I thought I'd do is I'd give it a difficult task, which is to take a snare and make it smacky and impactful. And that's something which tends to require a pretty specialist kind of compressor. Most compressors won't really do that well. And there's certain compressors which are, that's almost their speciality, is to give you a smacky snare sound. I find it amazing that this compressor can do that. Not just do it, but do it incredibly well. And at the same time do all the really subtle mastering stuff just as well. It's quite astounding, actually. So we're going to see that. I'm going to start with it bypassed. And just so you understand how that works, when the light is on down here, this bypass light, that means it's bypassed. And when the light is off, it means it's engaged, which is a little confusing maybe, but that's how it works. The reason I'm using that is because it's got quite a bit of latency because there's a lot of processing going on. So if I use Logic's built-in bypass, you'll get this jump in the sound, whereas the bypass that's built in is latency compensated, so you're not going to get that, so I'm going to use that. So we're going to start with it bypassed, and you can have a listen to the snare sound, and then I'm going to bring it in. So you can hear just how well it has done that smacky, impactful snare sound, which, as I said, it's very difficult for most compressors to do that. Most compressors, you never get that effect out of them. And there's this sort of range of compressors which are particularly good at that, which mixers tend to gravitate to if they want that sound on the snare. And just to demonstrate that if you set it up right, this compressor is fully capable of doing that, which is quite amazing. So it's super versatile. Just to mention that because I'm screen recording, things are a little laggy, and the display here, I noticed, is not really showing up in full detail. It's giving you a kind of like less detailed version, and I think that's simply because because I'm screen recording at the same time. So just be aware that this is moving by in a kind of jerky way. That's why when you're not screen recording, it moves by in a really smooth, detailed way. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the kick drum. So with the kick drum, I'm not looking to really compress it a lot like I did with the snare and increase the attack or anything like that. What I was looking for with this was more solidity and have the low end more beefy and just add weight to it. So I'm going to start with a bypass and then bring it in. So you can really hear the solidity and extra weight it's bringing to the kick without affecting the attack or making it sound like it's being compressed. And the way I've done this is by using the Weiss's ability to work as a multi-band compressor. So you can, in this version of it, in the full version, you can do the bands separately. In this version, you get the option to have a low, split the band into two and compress the lower, or you can split it like this so that you have a movable band within which you can compress without affecting the bands outside of it. But in this case, I'm using that low band separation. So this area is not going to be compressed, and I'm only compressing this area here, and I'm going to adjust the frequency here and the threshold here. So I'm not going to do a full walkthrough of this in this video. It's got a lot of depth in it, but just to show you that this is what I'm using. So it's compressing the low end with a very long attack, so 50 millisecond attack, and a fast release. So, and the ratio is quite high. So what that's doing is it's allowing all the upper frequencies to come through uncompressed. So it's not affecting the attack, so it's not giving you that sound you'd normally get with a wide band compressor. If you put that kind of compression on it, would sound heavily compressed like the snare does. But it is compressing the lows, but with a very long attack, which means quite a bit of the impact still comes through. So it's not getting, again, it's not getting squashed, but the fast release means it's bringing up that low level information more, and you're getting that fullness. Which is what I was after, that solidity and weight. So again, very impressive that this compressor can do that and everything else that it can do. So now we will move on to the mix, the drum bus. So with the drum bus, I was after, again, something fairly subtle on this because the snare is already heavily compressed. I didn't want to kind of compress the drum bus too much again on top of that. So what I was really looking for is just a solidity and a smoothness to it. And this compressor also excels at that. Now, once I've shown you this, I will mess around with the controls so you can hear what it's like on more extreme settings. Just making sure that's in. It is on the drum bus. But I'll do that after I've shown you what it's like in a kind of smoothing, solidifying role. So I'm going to start with a bypass. So this is YouTube, which means it might be harder to hear the subtler effects. So this is a lot subtler than the other two compression settings I had. But hopefully you can hear how it really consolidates and smooths the drum bus. That's really hard to do, and it's one of the things that this compressor is really, really good at. And that's what you expect from a mastering compressor. I can't think of many other compressors that can give it that sheen, that kind of sophisticated, expensive sounding sheen. The only other one that comes to mind is the Unisum, which is also really amazing at doing that. And a whole load of other things. It's also another really, really versatile compressor like this one. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mess with the controls and get some more extreme settings just so you can hear what that's like. And that was just a quick run through of possibilities. A huge range, you can see absolutely huge range possible with this. So what I was doing there is I was taking this mid bend here that you can slide around and moving that to different places, compressing the low end more, compressing the upper mids, compressing the lower mids. Doing this gives it a real huge low end because you're pulling down in that whole upper lows area, allowing the rest of it to come up more. And when I had it over here in the snare area, it was really pulling down on that snare in quite an extreme way while leaving the low end untouched. So yeah, for extreme, and at the beginning I did a parallel compression thing with your classic kind of like fast release thing to give it that kind of big sound. So it's, you know, capable of, you know, many kinds of compression. And obviously that was just a tiny example of what's possible. And of course, if you slide this out, you get an awful lot of other controls here. You can change the way the release behaves and the way that the way it reacts. So, and you can change the way it reacts. You know, bringing up the RMS or more of a peak characteristic, a delay on the release. I mean, there's a lot here that you can change in terms of getting deeper into how you can control what it does. But again, this is not going to be a walkthrough. So now I'm going to paste back in my setting there, which is that subtler effect. And now we're going to move on to the bass. Now the bass, let's hear it before and afterwards. Here I was not going for anything too extreme, but I wanted the bass to sound solid and controlled. So without and then with. So, and now in context of the drums, I think it's important to hear it in context, starting without. So it really smooths out the bass and holds it and controls it while keeping it nice and full and not making it sound too squashed, and that's what I was after with this. So it works nicely on bass. So now let's look at the mix bus. So here again, I'm going for something quite subtle. I don't want to squash it too much, and you know, I wouldn't normally put compression on the mix bus. I'd leave that for mastering. And I really think that if you're going to put a compressor on the tube bus in mastering, if you're going to use a compression at all in mastering, which quite often you don't, but if you do, it needs to be used in conjunction with EQ, and I'm not doing any of that here. So I always consider just chucking a compressor on the tube bus something that I wouldn't normally do just on its own like this. So I'm not going to get a result here that I would go for if I was going to put compression on the tube bus, but nonetheless, hopefully it will demonstrate what this compressor can do. So I'm going for a pretty subtle effect here. So not too much compression, but going for a smoothing glue approach. So starting with a bypassed, and then I'll bring it in. So hopefully you can hear that. Fairly subtle effect. So on YouTube I'm not sure how it'll come across, but it's giving it a glue and obviously gluing things nicely. I've got the release, as I did on the drum bus, I've timed the release to quarter notes at the tempo, and not that you'd always time it to quarter notes, but for this one I thought that worked well, and that helps give it that glue. Light ratio, you can see there, it's 1 to 1.2 or 1.3. It's got a knee, quite a knee, so it's, you know, the compression's a bit more gradual as it goes above the threshold. Or above the threshold it comes in a bit more, and yeah, the ratio, it's not squashing it, it's not pulling up too much low-level information. In other words, the threshold is not too low. And because I wanted a subtle gluing effect, I didn't want it to be too changed by this. Hopefully it gave you a little bit of an impression of what it can do in this context. So I hope this was useful. Certainly I think this is an amazing compressor. It definitely has that expensive sound to it. It gives the top end that sheen that's really hard to get out of compressors. There's only a few to my ears that really do that. This one and the Unisum, and maybe one or two others. And it just has a feeling of sophistication about everything it does. It's really hard to make it sound bad. It's kind of impossible to make it sound bad. And it's super versatile, from everything from snare smack to bass solidity to you know, drum bus or two bus glue to extreme drum bus effects. It's really, it's astonished to me just what this compressor is capable of, and I've only just shown you kind of little bits of what it can do. So yeah, highly recommended as a compressor. It's got an awful lot of other features I haven't covered that I may cover in another video. So I hope this was useful, and if you found it useful, please do subscribe and give the video a like, and hope to see you next time.